fellow knitters, welcome to my Colorwork series. In this video I'm going to be demonstrating a coloring technique called Fair Isle or stranded knitting. It's basically you're using two colors at one time in the particular row that you're in. In general, you don't use more than two colors, and what you're doing is you are creating floats, and on the inside you'll see what I'm talking about. So if you look at just the silver portion, which is right here, you have your purl bumps or your purl stitches. This is a stockinette stitch. Now in the middle where the color work is happening, you see that there's a pattern of pink and silver, and each one of these little line segments are called floats, and so that's kind of what is referred to as the strand or the stranded knitting, and that's why it's Fair Isle. But Fair Isle is a wonderful technique where you can create some very intricate design work in your knitting, and you can even do numbers, letters, team logos, sports logos, things like that. In this particular hat, there's a pattern. It's an Argyle pattern that's used in the pink. So in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to actually do that. Now, what you see right here is some ribbing. I'm actually starting a new hat. This is, and by the way, this demonstration is in the round. You can do Fair Isle knitting on flat knitting as well, but in this one, I'm going to be demonstrating it in the round. Now, also in this particular video, I'm going to be demonstrating two-handed knitting, and so typically, depending on which hand you use, if you use your right hand to knit with, you're actually doing what's referred to as English style knitting. So for example, you're going in and then you're going around like that and to do your knit stitch. And so that is English style. And of course, continental style is where you're using your left hand and then you're knitting as such. So in this demonstration, I'm going to be actually showing you how to do two-handed knitting, where you're actually holding, or you're doing continental in one hand, and then with your alternate color, you'd be using your right hand and doing English style. And then I'm going to demonstrate how to carry along your alternate or contrasting color throughout your knitting, and that's where you're actually creating the floats, because when you're actually knitting a pattern into your pattern design into your knitting, you want to carry along your alternate color. Typically, as you knit away from a color, you would leave that particular color. I'm also going to demonstrate the every other stitch float, which basically is carrying, if you're going more than, you're not going to go more than 2 stitches when you're carrying over your alternate color. In general, when you're doing float knitting, you don't want to go more. You can actually do a longer float, but you don't want to really go past 3 to 5 stitches, depending on your gauge, because if your float is really long, like this, so this was where you perhaps had stopped using the pink, but then you need to start using the pink all the way down here. That's a really long float, and the problem with having a long float is it could potentially be caught on something, or you might even have tension issues or tension problems with your knitting. So as demonstrated on this hat, I use an every other stitch float, so it's a tighter float. The other thing that's nice about doing that is it actually bulks your knitting up a bit. So when you look at up here where there aren't any floats, you can actually feel the difference here because you're working with 2 colors. It's actually padded a little bit more. Okay, so we're ready to begin the pattern of the Fair Isle, of the Argyle, and this is the pattern that I'm going to be using. At the very end of this video, there is a better screenshot of the actual pattern, and if you're using a mobile device to view this video, you'd have plenty of time at the end to do like a screenshot if you wanted to, or you can also do a screenshot of this pattern at the end of the video from your computer as well. And if you want to save that as a JPEG file or a PNG file, that would work out as well. Also, throughout the video, you'll see this pattern in the lower corner of the video with a little dot next to each particular row that I happen to be on. That can help you follow along. But again, the pattern at the end will has a better view of this. My printer's almost out of ink, but the pattern at the end also shows the lines. So in this particular pattern, for example, the first row, if you wanted to follow along, the first row and first column is going to be, anytime you see a black square, that represents your contrasting or alternate color, which is the pink in this case. And then a white square represents your primary color, which of course is the brown. So for example, in this first row, you'd see there's one black. That means that there's going to be one stitch done in the pink, and then it's followed by 7 white squares here. And of course, you're working from right to left, and the 7 white squares represent 7 stitches done in the brown. And then of course, in column 9 of your knitting, you'd see a black square that represents where you'd use the pink again. So this is where we're going to use our the technique that I showed you a little bit earlier, where you're going to be doing double-handed knitting, and you're also going to be carrying along the pink by creating floats to bring because you don't want to leave your contrasting color behind, because when you need to pick it up and use it again, if it's all the way here at the beginning because you didn't carry it along, you're going to have a huge float. And again, that can cause tension problems in your work, or it can cause it to snag onto something, and then of course that would ruin your work altogether. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and insert a stitch marker. This is the beginning, and we're going to be doing 16 stitch repeats, a total of 7 of them. So after you do the first one, you'd have 6 more to do in this case, for a total of 112 stitches, because each repeat is a total of 16 stitches. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get my yarns ready that we're going to be using. And the way that I put on the new yarn here, and of course you are going to have a tail that you will be weaving in. You'll weave in all of your tails at the very end. So you want to go in, of course, to your first stitch knitwise, and then I just take this and then loop it around. Of course, you want to make sure you have enough tail to weave in at the end, and then of course just knit this first one like so, and then go ahead and set or get your tension in place by make sure you don't grab your tail and start doing this. Because you'll eventually you'd run out pretty quickly, but you'd know that. Alright, so we've got our first stitch in place, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to knit 7 according to the chart, because we are in row 1. We're going to knit 7 stitches. So this is the first one in brown. That's the first one. And then of course we're going to create a float, and the way that that you do the float is you take your non-working yarn at the time, and you bring it, if it's on your right, you bring it under your needle as if to knit, and then you take your working yarn and then you go over the needle. So this is kind of like weaving in your ends or knitting in your ends. And then what you do is you just swing the pink out of the way, because you do not want to knit the pink through, because you'd be doing 2 things. You'd be actually increasing your stitch, because you'd be putting an additional stitch onto your knitting needle, and you don't want to do that. So by swinging it out of the way, it leaves you free to continue on and finish that knit stitch with the brown. Okay, so that's 2 stitches in the brown. In the next stitch, you just simply knit. That's 3. And then the next stitch, we're going to again create the float with our pink yarn, because we want to carry that along. So again, you go under, and then you take your working yarn and you go over, and then you can swing that out of the way, and then you complete the stitch. And I'm deliberately going slow so that you can see exactly what I'm doing, but once you get the hang of it, it is pretty fast. But again, I'm doing this slow so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And then the 5th stitch, just a normal knit stitch with the brown. And then the 6th stitch, again, creating the float with the pink, and then you bring your brown over, and then you swing this out of the way. And see, by doing that, what you're doing is and you can see this clearly with the brown, what you're doing is you are hooking or snaring or snagging like that. You can see it better there. That pink to carry it along. Okay, so that's 6 with the brown, and then 7. So we've done 1 pink and 7 brown, so we've done a total of 8 stitches in this repeat section. And of course the 9th stitch, according to the chart, we're going to do a pink again. And we just simply knit that. And then we're going to do 7 more brown stitches. So you just simply go in, you just knit this first one. And then the second one we're going to create, because we want to float this pink along with it. So you go under, and then you take your brown and go over, and then swing this out of the way, and then knit that. And then the third one is just a simple knit. And then the 4th one again, you go under, and then over, and then swing that out of the way. That's 4. Then 5. And then 6. Then 7. So if you're paying attention, what you're actually doing is you are on your even stitches with your brown. You're actually floating your pink, and then on the odd stitches you're just simply knitting. So we've done 16 stitches, and of course that's the number of stitches in the repeat. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start again this section here. So that's 1 with the pink, that first stitch. And then the second stitch is going to be 7, or we're going to be doing 7 stitches of the brown next. And so the second stitch is the first of that for the brown. So that's 1. And then the 2, we're going to float. And 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. And then 1 pink, so simply knitting it. And then the next stitch is the brown. And then carry along or float the pink. It's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And so we've just done that repeat again. So I'm going to continue around and finish row 1, and then when I come back we'll be at the beginning of row 2, and I'll show you that. So again, this is the first row per the pattern, and of course if you turn your work over you can see your floats, and the pink is what we've been floating across this row. Alright, so now we're ready to begin the second row, and if you notice on the pattern, and again this is in the lower left screen, the dot has moved up if you weren't paying attention, but we're on the second row now, and of course the first 2 columns we're going to do 2 pinks, and then what we're doing now is we're actually building our pattern. So we've got 2 pinks followed by 5 browns, followed by 1 pink, 1 brown, 1 pink, 5 browns, and 1 pink. And of course if you notice the pattern, if you were to cut this out and wrap it around or roll it into a tube, this would match up with this right here. This would match up with this right here, and it would actually complete a diamond exactly like this one here. So that's why the pattern kind of looks funky if you're not used to working with patterns. The same thing with the crisscross. The crisscross does the same thing on the bottom, if you notice, because there's like a gap here. If you were to put water in here or pour water out, it seems like there's a dot missing, and that's because this dot here, if you were to repeat this as I am for the hat pattern, this would actually occur right up here on top and close this X. So that's how the pattern works. But so we're on number 2 right now, if you want to follow along. So again, you pick up your working yarns, making sure not to accidentally pick up any tails. And so again, I always put this is an old keychain part. Alright, so the first 2 stitches are going to be done in pink. And of course this is loose, but once you complete this row and tug on that tail again a little bit, it will close this first stitch, so don't worry about that. Now the second stitch, we want to float the brown. So the way you float your brown is you come over the needle with your brown, and as a rule of thumb, the one you want to float is always the one that you put over your needle first or under, depending on which direction you're coming from. And then if you go under with your pink and then move your brown out of the way, as you can see, you are snagging or catching that brown to create the float. So those are the first 2 stitches in pink, and now we need to do 5 in brown. So that's 1, and then 2, we're going to float the pink again, so under, over, back around. So that's 2, 3, float the pink, 4, and 5. And then we're going to do 1 pink, 1 brown, and when you're doing every other stitch like that, you don't have to float, because the floats are being created automatically, so you don't have to catch any of the yarns. And then 1 pink again, and then we're going to do 5 browns, so that's 1, float the pink, that's 2, 3, float the pink, 4, 5, and then we're going to end this with 1 pink. So that's the first 16 stitches in row 2, and then we begin that repeat pass again. So the first 2 stitches are pink. So 1, float the brown, 2, and then begin your 5 browns. So I'm going to continue row 2, and then when I come back I'll start row 3. Okay, so I just finished row 2, and now I'm coming up to the beginning. I've already moved my stitch marker, and as I mentioned before, now that we have that row on top of the start of the pink, we can tug the tail a little bit to tighten that first one, and then of course we'll weave that in at the end. Alright, so row 3 is going to be, according to the chart, 3 pink, and then 3 brown, and then 1 pink, and then 3 brown, and then 1 pink, 3 brown, and 2 pink. So we'll go ahead and pick up our working yarns, plural. Of course, make sure you don't catch the tail by accident since you're so close to it, and that won't really be an issue as you're further up on your work. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we have our brown, which is kind of a stitch away here. So what we're going to do is we're going to catch that one so that we can move it forward along in our work. We don't want to leave it too far behind. So you go over the needle, because we aren't using the brown, as I mentioned prior. The yarn the working yarn that you don't want to use is the one that you lay down or go under first. And then you wrap your working pink yarn around and then kind of move the brown out of the way so as not to catch it when you finish and complete your knit stitch. So that's 1, 2, and then 3. Again, over, around, and then move out of the way like that. And then we're going to do 3 browns. That's 1, 2. We're going to carry the pink, and 3. And then we're going to do 1 pink, and then 3 browns. That's 1, 2, 3, and then again 1 pink, 3 browns. That's 1, 2, and then we're going to carry the pink, 3, and then 2 pink. So that's 1, carry the brown, 2. So that is the end of that repeat cycle. And then we'll start again. We're going to do 3 pink. That's 1, 2, carry your brown, 3, then we're going to do 3 brown, 1, carry your pink, 2, right, and then 1 pink, and then 3 brown, 1, 2, carry your pink, 3, 1 pink, 3 brown, carry your pink, 2, 3, and then 2 pink. Your brown. And again, you're at the end of that cycle. So we've done 2 of the 7. So I'll do the other 5, and then when I come back, I'll show you row 4. And then move your stitch marker, and then we're ready to begin row 4. And row 4 is going to be 4 pink, 1 brown, 1 pink, 5 brown, 1 pink, 1 brown, 3 pink. So the 4 pink is 1, carry your brown, 2, 3, carry your brown, 4, then 1 brown, 1 pink, 5 brown, 1, carry your pink, 2, 3, carry your pink, 4, pink, 1 brown, 3 pink, carry a brown, 2, 3. And that's the end of that repeat section. So you can see that you're starting to build your pattern. And then of course, if you turn your work over, you can see your floats. And actually, I think the floats, some people think they're ugly, but I think they make an interesting design, especially when you're consistently doing them over a pattern. You can actually kind of see the anti picture or the reverse picture of what it is that you're doing with regard to your pattern. And with regard to the floats, in this video I demonstrated doing the every other stitch float. You can certainly do a 3-stitch float, 4-stitch float, 5-stitch float, but try not to go above 5 stitches with regard to floating your contrasting yarn or whichever yarn you're not working with, because again, as I mentioned towards the beginning of the video, you'll have problems where if one of those floats snags on something, then that will end up kinking your work, or you could have tension issues again with regard to either it snags or as you're working your work might either scrunch in because of the loose strands. But that is up to you with regard to how many floats that you use. The only other tip that I have for you guys is if you have to set your work down and you're in the middle of a row, in other words, you haven't come all the way back to your stitch marker, try if possible to end on a repeat section as I did. So these are the 16 stitches that are in the repeat right here. And so now if I have to set my work down to go do something else, when I come back to pick it up, all I have to do is, and again, you might want to note which row you're in, of course, but all I have to do is pick up and start at the beginning of that repeat section. So that is Fair Isle knitting in the round. As I mentioned, you can do this flat knitting exactly the same way if you're not working in the round. But thank you for watching my video. Please do post feedback and comments. I do actually read and respond to those. And also, please do subscribe to my channel so that you can see other videos in my colorwork series. I also have a brioche knitting series. I'm going to be putting some other series out there as well. So again, thank you for watching.